My name is Michael Davidson, and what I'm about to tell you happened to me in the summer of 1973. I still get chills thinking about those 6 days in the Wisconsin forests, but I need to share this story, if only to make sense of it all. I was 39 then. A writer trying to finish my second book and struggling to be both mom and dad to my 11-year-old daughter Emily. We lost Sarah, my wife and Emily's mother, just a year before in a car accident. The pain was still fresh, and Chicago's busy streets held too many memories. "Dad, can we go somewhere quiet?" Emily had asked one evening, looking up from her sketchbook. Somewhere with trees and animals. She was always the artistic one, just like her mother. That's when I had this idea, maybe we both needed to get away. So I bought this old 1971 Chevrolet Ultra van, you know, those classic ones with wood panels on the sides. Emily loved it right away, especially after we fixed it up with curtains and a small drawing desk for her. But the best part, we weren't going alone. We had Charlie with us, our unusual but loving companion. Charlie was Emily's wolf hybrid, part dog, part wolf, and completely devoted to her. We rescued him as a pup 6 months after Sarah passed. He was exactly what Emily needed then. Someone to hug when the nightmares came. "Where are we going?" Emily would ask every day as I planned our trip. "North," I'd tell her. "To the forests of Wisconsin. It'll be perfect for my writing, your drawing, and Charlie's wild side." I had no idea then how that simple escape plan would turn into the most terrifying adventure of our lives. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. The way Charlie got restless as we packed. How Emily's drawings started changing the week before we left. And that strange dream I had about an old lodge in the woods. But you probably want to know what really happened out there in those dark forests. Well, let me tell you about the day we found the Black Forest Lodge, and how our world turned upside down. It was a warm July afternoon when our RV finally broke down. We'd been driving through these thick Wisconsin forests for hours, and the road seemed to get narrower with each mile. The tall trees made everything darker, even though it was only 4 p.m. "Dad, I think Charlie needs to stretch his legs," Emily said from the back, where she was working on another one of her drawings. Charlie, our wolf dog, was pacing back and forth, making weird whining sounds I'd never heard before. I pulled over to what looked like an old campsite. The ground was covered with pine needles, and there was just enough space for our RV between the trees. "We'll stay here tonight," I told Emily. "Maybe someone can help us with the engine tomorrow." As Emily and Charlie went exploring nearby, I made sure they stayed where I could see them. I tried to start the RV again. Nothing, just that horrible clicking sound that meant we were stuck. That's when I first saw the path. It wasn't there before, I'm sure of it. But suddenly, between two massive pine trees, there was this narrow dirt trail leading deeper into the forest. Charlie started barking at it, his fur standing up. "Dad, Dad," Emily called out excitedly. "I can see a house through the trees." I grabbed our flashlight. Even though it was still daylight, the forest was getting darker, and we followed the path. Charlie stayed close to Emily, but he kept making these low growling sounds. After about 10 minutes of walking, we saw it, the Black Forest Lodge. It was a huge old building made of dark wood, with a wraparound porch and windows that seemed to watch us as we got closer. A thin line of smoke came from the chimney, which was strange for such a warm day. "Look, someone's home," Emily said, pointing at the smoke. But something felt off. The building looked both old and new at the same time, if that makes any sense. And the way it just sat there, surrounded by those ancient trees, it made my skin crawl. As we got to the front steps, I noticed something else weird. There weren't any cars around. No power lines either. How was anyone living out here? That's when the front door creaked open. An old woman stood there, smiling at us. She had silver hair tied in a neat bun, and wore a dress that looked like it was from the 1940s. "I've been expecting you," she said softly. "I'm Martha Erickson, and you must be the Davidsons." Emily gasped. Charlie growled louder. I felt my mouth go dry. How did she know our name? My head was spinning. How did this strange woman know who we were? We hadn't told anyone about our trip, not even our neighbors back in Chicago. "Oh, don't look so worried," Martha said, her smile growing wider. "The forest has a way of bringing people where they need to be. Your RV broke down, didn't it?" I nodded slowly, still suspicious. Emily moved closer to me, and Charlie stood between us and Martha, his tail straight and stiff. "Well, you can't stay out there in this weather," Martha said, looking up at the sky. I followed her gaze and noticed dark clouds gathering above the trees. Funny, it had been sunny just minutes ago. "We have a perfectly good RV," I started to say, but thunder rumbled in the distance, making Emily jump. "Dad, maybe we should," Emily whispered, tugging at my sleeve. She was right. If it started raining, we'd be stuck in a broken-down RV in the middle of nowhere. Martha opened the door wider. "I have hot chocolate for the little artist," she said, nodding at Emily's sketchbook. "And I'm sure your wolf friend would enjoy a warm fire." Emily's eyes widened. "How did you know I draw?" Martha just smiled and pointed to Emily's hands. They were smudged with pencil marks. Of course, that made sense. But something still felt strange about all this. Inside, the lodge was different. The air smelled like pine needles and old books. A huge fireplace took up one wall, with a warm fire already burning. Comfortable-looking chairs and sofas were scattered around, and the walls were covered with paintings. Lots of paintings of the forest. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Martha said. "Emily dear, you'll have the one next to your father's. There's a special corner for Charlie too." I stopped walking. "We haven't agreed to stay yet," I said firmly. Martha turned to me, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. "But you will. The storm's coming, and besides," she paused, looking at my laptop bag. "Isn't this the perfect place for a writer to find inspiration?" Right then the lights flickered and thunder boomed so loud it shook the windows. Charlie pressed himself against Emily's legs, whimpering. "I'll get that hot chocolate," Martha said, heading toward what I assumed was the kitchen. "Oh, and Michael," she called back. "You might want to check the guest registry. I think you'll find it interesting." Emily and I looked at each other. On a small table near the entrance sat an old leather-bound book. When I opened it, my hands started shaking. There, on a page dated 1947, were 3 names written in fading ink: Michael Davidson, Emily Davidson, Charlie. I slammed the guest book shut, my heart racing. This had to be some kind of joke. Emily peeked around my arm. "Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before I could answer, Martha returned with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, acting like nothing was strange at all. "Here you are, dears. Emily, I added extra marshmallows to yours." The storm outside was getting worse. Rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees. We really didn't have much choice but to stay. "I'll show you to your rooms," Martha said, picking up an old-fashioned brass lamp. As we followed her up the creaking stairs, I noticed something odd about the paintings on the wall. They seemed to change when you weren't looking directly at them. One minute it was a sunny forest scene, the next it looked dark and misty. Emily's room was cozy, with a small bed and a desk perfect for drawing. My room next door had a writing desk by the window. Both rooms looked like they'd been waiting just for us. "Dinner's at 6, Martha said, then disappeared down the hallway so quickly it was like she vanished into the shadows. Emily sat on her bed, with Charlie right beside her. "Dad, look what I drew in the RV earlier," she said, opening her sketchbook. My blood went cold. There on the page was a perfect drawing of the Black Forest Lodge. She had drawn it hours before we even knew this place existed. "Emily, when did you?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "It just came to me. And look at this one." She turned the page. The next drawing showed a group of children playing in front of the lodge. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, like from the 1940s. In the background, watching from a window, was a figure that looked exactly like Martha. Thunder crashed again, and the lamp in my room flickered. Charlie started growling at something in the corner, but when I looked, nothing was there. That's when we heard it, the sound of children laughing somewhere in the lodge. But Martha had said we were the only guests. "Dad?" Emily's voice trembled. I think someone's knocking on my window. We both turned to look. Remember, we were on the second floor. I rushed to Emily's window, my heart pounding. There couldn't be anyone out there. We were too high up. But when I pulled back the curtain, I froze. A small handprint was pressed against the glass, like a child's hand. But it wasn't on the outside, it was on the inside of the window, even though we'd been watching the room the whole time. Charlie started barking like crazy, his eyes fixed on the corner of the room. Emily grabbed my arm tight. "Look at the handprint, Dad," she whispered. It's disappearing." She was right. The handprint was fading away like breath on a mirror. By the time I touched the glass, it was gone. "We're leaving," I said firmly. Right now, I don't care about the storm, but when I tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. Not stuck, not locked. It just wouldn't move, like it was part of the wall. Having trouble with the door, Martha's voice came from behind us, making us all jump. She was suddenly in the room, though I never heard her come in. The old lodge gets a bit tricky during storms. The wood swells, you see. "Who else is here?" I demanded. We heard children laughing. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, just the echoes of the past. This lodge has been here a very long time. Memories tend to stick around." Emily tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, look at my sketchbook again." The drawing of the children had changed. Now they were looking right at us, their faces sad. One of them was pressing their hand against what looked like a window. "Dinner's ready," Martha announced, as if nothing strange was happening. "I made your favorite, Emily, spaghetti and meatballs." Emily looked up, confused. "But how did you know that's my—" "The lodge knows what its guests need." Martha cut in. "Best come down now before it gets cold." The door suddenly swung open on its own. I wanted to run to grab Emily and Charlie and get out of there. But the storm was raging outside, the RV was broken, and we were miles from anywhere. Plus, something told me Martha wouldn't let us leave that easily. As we followed her downstairs, I noticed all the paintings on the walls had changed. Now they all showed nighttime scenes, even though they'd been daytime pictures just hours ago. And in every single one, if you looked carefully, you could see children hiding among the trees. The dining room was huge, with a long wooden table that could seat at least 20 people, but there were only 3 place settings, each with old-fashioned china plates and silver that looked like it was from another time. Charlie refused to come into the dining room. He just sat in the doorway watching Martha's every move. "Please sit," Martha said, placing a steaming bowl of spaghetti in front of Emily. "The lodge takes good care of its special guests." I noticed something odd about Martha as she served us. She never cast a shadow, even when she walked right in front of the fireplace. "Why are we special guests?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Martha smiled that strange smile again. "Because you're like the others, the creative ones. Emily with her art, and you with your writing, Michael." Emily was twirling spaghetti on her fork when she suddenly stopped. "Dad," she whispered, "look at the sauce." The red sauce on her plate was moving, swirling into shapes. For a split second, I swear it formed the image of children running. "Oh my," Martha said, "looks like the lodge is getting excited. It's been so long since we had young talent here." "What do you mean young talent?" I demanded. "Like the children from 1947, Martha said casually, like she was talking about the weather. "Such gifted artists they were. Their paintings are still here, you know. In fact, they're still here too, in a way." Right then we heard more children laughing, closer this time. Charlie started howling. "Where are they?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "The children from 1947, Martha picked up an empty wine glass, holding it up to the light. "Why don't you look in the mirror behind you? They've been watching us this whole time." We turned around slowly. In the large mirror on the dining room wall, we could see our reflections, but we weren't alone. Standing behind our chairs were several children in old-fashioned clothes, smiling sadly at us. When we spun around to look behind us, there was nobody there. But in the mirror they remained, waving at Emily. "You see," Martha said, setting down her glass, The lodge needs creative energy to survive, and you two, you have so much to give. The lights began to flicker, and Charlie's howls grew louder. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her up from the table. We're going to our rooms now. My voice was shaking, but I tried to sound brave for Emily. Martha just kept smiling.
Dear.
But remember, the lodge has its own plans. As we hurried upstairs with Charlie right behind us, the whole building seemed different. The hallway looked longer, and the paintings, they were definitely moving now. Trees swayed in them even though there was no wind. Dad, Emily whispered when we got to her room, I need to show you something else. She pulled out her sketchbook again, her hands trembling. The new drawing made my heart stop. It showed Martha, but she didn't look human anymore. Her body was twisted like tree branches, and her eyes were completely black. Behind her were the children from 1947 trapped in what looked like picture frames. I drew this while we were eating, Emily said. I couldn't help it. My hand just moved by itself. Suddenly, Charlie started barking at Emily's desk. Her colored pencils were rolling across it, by themselves. They stopped at a blank page in her open sketchbook and stood up on their own, like they were ready to draw. Don't look, I shouted, slamming the sketchbook shut. The pencils fell to the floor. That's when we heard Martha's voice, but it didn't sound human anymore. It came from everywhere at once. The lodge chose you both, your creativity, your talent. It's been so hungry for so long. The room got colder, so cold we could see our breath. Charlie jumped on Emily's bed, putting himself between us and the door. The children, Emily said quietly, they're trying to tell us something. She pointed at the mirror on her wall. In the mirror, the children were holding up drawings of their own. One showed a large tree in the forest. Another showed what looked like a door hidden in its roots. The last drawing showed a key made of wood. We have to get out of here, I said, and I think they're trying to help us. But Dad, Emily gripped my hand tighter. Look at the window. Outside, the forest had changed. The trees were moving closer to the lodge, their branches reaching like hands. And between them, gliding through the darkness, were shapes that looked like glowing children. Martha's laugh echoed through the lodge again. The night is just beginning, my dears. And the lodge is ready to play. We had to think fast. I grabbed Emily's backpack and stuffed in her sketchbook and pencils. Something told me we'd need them. Charlie was still growling, his eyes fixed on the doorway. The tree, Emily whispered. The one from the children's drawings. We need to find it. Just then, our door slammed shut on its own. The temperature dropped even more, and frost started spreading across the walls like spider webs. Now, Martha's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Leaving so soon. But the lodge has such wonderful plans for your talents. That's when something incredible happened. Charlie stepped forward, and his eyes started glowing a soft blue color. He let out a howl that sounded different. Almost like words. Emily gasped. Dad, I can understand him. He says there's a way out through the kitchen. I didn't have time to question how my daughter could suddenly understand our wolf dog. We had to move. The hallway outside was changing. The wallpaper peeled off by itself, revealing moving images underneath like a movie playing on the walls. They showed children drawing and writing, their creativity being sucked away by something dark and hungry. We ran downstairs following Charlie. The stairs kept trying to move under our feet, like they were alive. Pictures flew off the walls, and we heard Martha's laugh getting closer. You can't leave, her voice echoed. You're part of the lodge's collection now. The kitchen was different too. All the modern appliances were gone, replaced by old wood-burning stoves and antique cookware. But Charlie led us straight to a small door near the pantry, one I hadn't noticed before. Wait, Emily said, pulling out her sketchbook. The children are drawing something new. In the mirror above the kitchen sink, we could see the ghostly children frantically drawing. Their picture showed us something important. We needed Emily's art to open the door. Emily, I said, trying to stay calm as the kitchen started to fill with a dark mist. "You need to draw us a way out." Emily's hands were shaking as she opened her sketchbook. Charlie stood guard, his glowing eyes scanning the dark mist that was getting thicker around us. "Hurry, sweetie," I whispered, watching the kitchen door. I could hear Martha's footsteps getting closer, the sound changing from human steps to something that sounded like branches scraping across the floor. Emily started drawing faster than I'd ever seen her draw before. On the page, a wooden door appeared, exactly like the one in front of us. Then she added a keyhole, and finally, a special key made of twisted tree roots. The moment she finished drawing the key, something heavy dropped into her lap. We both stared in shock. It was the exact same key she had just drawn, made of real wood and warm to the touch. "You can't escape the lodge's hunger," Martha's voice boomed. The kitchen windows all cracked at once, and that dark mist started taking shape, looking like reaching hands. Charlie barked urgently. Emily jumped up and pushed the key into the door's lock. It fit perfectly. "Don't turn it yet." I heard a child's voice whisper from the mirror, "Draw the path first." "Draw where you want to go," Emily quickly drew again. This time a path leading through the forest to our RV. As she drew, golden lines appeared on the kitchen floor, glowing like a trail of starlight. "Now." Charlie's bark somehow formed the word in our minds. Emily turned the key, just as Martha burst into the kitchen. But she wasn't Martha anymore. She was a twisted thing of bark and branches with those horrible black eyes. "The lodge needs you," she shrieked, reaching for us with fingers like twigs. The door flew open, revealing a glowing path exactly like the one Emily had drawn. Charlie jumped through first, then I grabbed Emily and pulled her through just as Martha's branch fingers brushed against my jacket. We found ourselves outside, but everything was different. The forest was alive with movement, and those glowing children were everywhere, pointing us toward the path Emily had drawn. "Run!" I shouted, holding Emily's hand tight as we followed the golden trail. Behind us we could hear the lodge creaking and groaning, like it was trying to move, to follow us. But the worst sound was Martha's scream, a sound that was part human, part wind in the trees, and part something much, much older. We ran as fast as we could along Emily's glowing path. The forest was alive around us. Trees bent and swayed, their branches trying to grab us. Charlie led the way, his blue glow lighting up the darkness. "Don't look back," I yelled to Emily, but I could hear it. The sound of the lodge actually moving through the forest, its wooden walls groaning and cracking as it followed us. "The children," Emily shouted between breaths. "They're helping us." She was right. The ghostly children from 1947 were running alongside us, pushing back branches that tried to grab us. Some of them were even drawing in the air with glowing fingers, creating bridges over fallen trees and lighting up our path. Suddenly Martha's voice boomed through the forest. "The lodge has waited decades for talents like yours. Your creativity belongs to us now." The ground started shaking. Roots burst up from the dirt, trying to trip us. That's when Emily stumbled, her sketchbook falling open. "Keep running," she screamed, quickly drawing something on a blank page. As soon as she finished, a pack of wolves made of moonlight appeared, running beside Charlie. They charged at the moving roots, biting through them like they were real. I could see our RV ahead, exactly where Emily had drawn it. But Martha wasn't giving up. The dark mist was everywhere now, and through it I saw her twisted tree-like form getting closer. "Emily." Charlie's bark somehow formed words again. "Draw us a weapon." Emily's hands were shaking as she drew while running, a simple picture of the sun breaking through clouds. The moment she finished, real beams of light burst through the dark sky above us, making Martha shriek and the mist retreat. We were almost at the RV when I heard Emily gasp. I turned and saw why. Mice. The lodge had caught up, walking on legs made of twisted tree trunks, its windows glowing with an evil red light. "One last drawing," the ghost children shouted. "Make it count." Emily stopped running and faced the walking lodge. Her hands were steady now, as she opened her sketchbook one last time. Emily, no. I tried to pull her toward the RV, but Charlie blocked my way, his blue eyes saying trust her. The ghost children gathered around Emily, each one placing their glowing hands on her shoulders. Martha's twisted form loomed over us, her branch arms reaching down. You can't fight the lodge with mere drawings, child. Martha's voice rattled like dead leaves. Watch me, Emily said quietly, and started to draw. This time was different. As her pencil moved across the paper, real light followed her lines. She drew the lodge, but not the scary version chasing us. She drew it as it must have looked when it was new, peaceful and warm. What are you doing? Martha shrieked, but she seemed frozen in place. I'm drawing the truth, Emily said, her voice stronger now. The lodge wasn't always hungry. It wasn't always evil. You taught children here, Martha. Real art. Happy art. The ghost children started to glow brighter. In Emily's drawing, she added them too. Not trapped, but free and smiling. Martha's tree-like body began to crack. No. Stop, the lodge needs. The lodge needs to remember what it was meant to be, Emily said, drawing the final line. Suddenly, everything lit up like daylight. The dark mist vanished. The twisted trees straightened, and Martha, her wooden form, crumbled away, leaving just a sad-looking old woman. The ghost children laughed. Real, happy laughs this time. One by one, they faded away, waving goodbye. The last one hugged Emily before disappearing. The lodge shuddered, then settled back onto the ground, looking like a normal building again. Martha looked at us with clear human eyes. Thank you, she whispered, and then she too faded away like an old photograph. Charlie's eyes stopped glowing, and he wagged his tail for the first time since we'd arrived. Dad? Emily turned to me, holding her sketchbook. Can we go home now? Surprisingly, our RV started perfectly on the first try. As we drove away, I kept checking the rear-view mirror. The lodge just sat there, looking like any old building in the morning light. But we knew better. The children, Emily said quietly, looking through her sketchbook. All their drawings are gone now. But look at this, Dad. On the last page was a simple thank you written in children's handwriting, and below it, a drawing of Martha as she must have been in 1947. A kind-looking art teacher surrounded by happy students. Charlie lay with his head in Emily's lap, just a normal wolf dog again. But sometimes, when he looks at Emily drawing, I swear his eyes still have a hint of that blue glow. We drove straight home to Chicago. The whole way back I kept thinking it must have been a dream. But Emily's sketchbook had changed, her drawings were different now. More alive somehow. And sometimes, they seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. A week later, I found an old newspaper article from 1947. It was about Martha Erickson, a beloved art teacher who disappeared with her students during a summer art camp. The article showed a photo of the Black Forest Lodge in its better days. It looked exactly like Emily's final drawing. Dad, Emily said one evening, while drawing at her desk, do you think we'll ever see them again? I hope not, sweetie, I replied honestly. But I think they're at peace now. Charlie barked in agreement, and for a second, just a second, I thought I heard him say, they're free. These days Emily still draws, and I'm still writing. But we're more careful about where we take our creative holidays. Though sometimes, on quiet nights, we look at that last drawing in Emily's sketchbook, and remember the children we helped free, and the lodge that learned to let go of its hunger. As for Martha and the Black Forest Lodge, well, some say, if you drive through northern Wisconsin's forests, you might still see an old building among the trees. But now they say, you can hear children laughing. Not in fear, but in joy. My name is Jackson Winters, but everyone calls me Jack. What I'm about to tell you happened to me and my kids back in the winter of 1977, and I still get chills thinking about it. Some nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself going back to those 6 terrifying days in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. I was 41 then, still trying to figure out how to be both mom and dad to my kids after Sarah, my wife, passed away the year before. Kyle was 14, always with his camera hanging around his neck, a gift from his mother. Annie was just 9, such a sweet kid with this weird ability to know things before they happened. And then there was Max, our big fluffy Alaskan Malamute, who was more like a third child than a pet. Sarah and I had bought this old Winnebago Indian RV back in '74, you know, the type, those classic ones with brown and orange stripes running down the sides. We'd had so many happy camping trips in it, but after she died, just looking at it sitting in our driveway hurt too much. I decided to sell it, but first I wanted to give the kids one last trip, something to remember their mom by. I used to be a park ranger, so I knew all the good spots. The Boundary Waters was beautiful in winter. At least that's what I thought back then. We planned for a week-long stay at this remote campground called Frost Hollow. Funny how names can be a warning, if you're smart enough to listen. If I had known what was waiting for us there in those frozen woods, well, let's just say some family trips aren't meant to be taken. But I guess you'll want to hear the whole story, won't you? It's not an easy one to tell, and some parts might be hard to believe. But I swear on Sarah's grave, every word of what I'm about to share is true. It all started when we left Minneapolis early that morning. The sky was gray, and tiny snowflakes were starting to fall. Kyle sat in the passenger seat, already snapping pictures of the road ahead, while Annie curled up in the back with Max, reading her favorite book. "Dad, are you sure we should go?" Annie asked, her voice small and worried. "I have a funny feeling about this trip." I laughed it off then. Annie always had these feelings, but I just thought she was sad about selling the RV. "It'll be fun, sweetheart, just like old times." But Max was acting strange too. Usually he'd be excited about trips, sticking his head out the window and wagging his tail. That day he just lay there, whining softly every time we drove further north. The radio started doing weird things about 2 hours into our drive. One minute it was playing normal music, then it would crack with static, and I swear I could hear children laughing through the noise. Kyle tried to fix it, but nothing worked, so we just turned it off. The snow got heavier as we drove. Way heavier than the weather report had predicted. By the time we reached the small town near Frost Hollow, I could barely see the road. We stopped at this old Native American shop to get some supplies. The old man behind the counter looked at us funny when I mentioned where we were headed. "Frost Hollow," he said, shaking his head. "Not good camping this time of year. Strange things happen there in winter." I thought he was just trying to scare the kids with local legends. Growing up around here, I'd heard all sorts of stories. But then he grabbed my arm, his eyes dead serious. "If you hear singing in the night, don't look out your windows. If you see tracks in the snow bigger than your foot, pack up and leave." Annie tugged at my jacket. "Dad, please. Can we go somewhere else?" But I was stubborn. We'd driven all this way, and I wanted to give them this last memory in Sarah's RV. Besides, I'd been a park ranger, what could possibly happen that I couldn't handle? By the time we pulled into Frost Hollow, it was getting dark. The campground was empty, except for one other RV far on the other side. The snow was falling so thick now that we could barely see it. As I parked our Winnebago, Kyle lowered his camera slowly. "Dad," he whispered, "look at the temperature gauge." I glanced at the dashboard. The thermometer read -40 degrees Fahrenheit. That wasn't just cold, that was impossible for this time of year. And that was just the beginning of what would become the longest 6 days of our lives. That first night in Frost Hollow was when things started feeling really wrong. I'd just finished making hot chocolate for the kids when Annie pressed her face against the RV window. "Someone's out there," she whispered, "in the trees." I looked out but could only see darkness and falling snow. "Honey, it's probably just branches moving in the wind." But Max knew better. Our usually brave dog was hiding under the table, his ears flat against his head. He wouldn't stop shaking no matter how much Kyle tried to calm him down. Around midnight, I woke up to Annie talking in her sleep. She was sitting straight up in her bed, pointing at the window, speaking words I'd never heard before. When I tried to wake her, her skin felt ice cold. "The Ice Mother," she mumbled before falling back asleep. "She wants to meet us." I tucked her back in, trying to ignore the way frost was creeping up the inside of our windows, even though the heater was running full blast. The next morning, Kyle came running back from taking pictures outside. His hands were shaking as he showed me his camera. "Dad, look at this," he said, pointing to the small screen. The photo showed our RV, but in the background, between the trees, there was something tall and white. It looked almost human-shaped, but wrong somehow, too tall, too thin, with arms that reached almost to the ground. "It's probably just snow falling," I said, but even I didn't believe that. Then we found the tracks. They were huge, bigger than my boots, with 3 long toes, like nothing I'd ever seen in all my years as a ranger. They led right up to our RV, and then disappeared. The worst part? The other RV we'd seen last night was gone. But there were no tire tracks in the fresh snow showing it had left. That's when Max started refusing to go outside after dark. He'd just sit by the door and growl at nothing we could see, and every time he did, Annie would get this look in her eyes, like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. The temperature kept dropping, and our food started freezing solid even inside the cabinets. The heater was working, but it felt like the cold was coming from inside the RV, not outside. That night, I heard children laughing outside in the darkness. When I looked out, I saw small footprints in the snow, appearing one by one, as if invisible kids were playing right in front of our RV. Annie woke up and walked to the window. "They're just like me, Dad," she said, her breath making frost patterns on the glass. "They want to play." I pulled her away from the window and held her tight. What had I gotten us into? Why hadn't I listened to that old man at the store? But it was too late now. The snow was too deep to drive out, and something told me that even if we tried to leave, they wouldn't let us. The third day started with a scream. I jumped out of bed to find Kyle staring at his arm. Strange frost patterns had appeared on his skin overnight, looking like old tribal markings. "They didn't hurt," he said, "but they were ice cold to touch." Annie was already awake, drawing pictures in her notebook. When I looked closer, my heart nearly stopped. She had drawn tall white figures, standing around our RV. "They're hungry," she said without looking up. "They've been waiting for so long." That afternoon, things got worse. I was trying to fix our radio when Max started barking like crazy. He needed to go outside for a bathroom break. I opened the door, and he ran out into the snow. "He'll be right back," I told the kids. But 5 minutes turned into 10, then 30. No Max. We called for him until our voices were hoarse. The snow was falling so hard now that we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Kyle kept taking pictures, hoping to catch a glimpse of Max in them. When we looked at the photos later, we saw something that made my blood run cold. In one picture, Max wasn't alone. A tall white figure was bending over him, its long fingers touching his fur. The strange thing was, Max wasn't running away. He was sitting there, like he was listening to something. That night, the temperature inside the RV dropped so low that we could see our breath. Ice started forming on the walls, making weird patterns that looked like faces. The worst part, we could hear Max howling somewhere in the darkness. But his howls sounded different. Almost like he was singing. Annie wouldn't stop talking about the Ice Mother now. She said she could hear her calling. "She's so lonely, Dad. She lost her children a long time ago. Now she wants new ones." I tried to radio for help, but all we got was static, and those children's voices again, clearer now, singing some kind of ancient song. Annie knew the words somehow. She started singing along in her sleep. Then Kyle found something under his pillow. An old frozen journal from 1952. The last entry was from another family that had stayed here. The children are gone, they went to her. They're part of the ice now, she's coming for us next. Just before midnight, we heard scratching at the door. When I opened it, Max was there, but he wasn't the same. His fur had turned white as snow, and his eyes glowed like ice in sunlight. He walked in calmly, leaving behind footprints that sparkled with frost. Annie hugged him, not scared at all. "He's one of them now," she whispered. "He's trying to protect us." But protect us from what? I was about to find out in the worst way possible. That night, everything fell apart. I woke up around 2 a.m. to find Kyle's bed empty. His camera was on his pillow, still warm, like he'd just put it down. "Kyle?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady for Annie's sake. But when I looked outside, I saw his footprints in the snow, leading straight into the dark forest. Annie was already awake, sitting with Max. "The Ice Mother took him," she said quietly. "She's showing him her home." I grabbed my flashlight and the flare gun I always kept for emergencies. Max stood up, his white fur glowing in the darkness, and walked to the door. He wanted to lead me to Kyle. "Stay here," I told Annie, but she shook her head. "We have to go together, Dad. She wants all of us." Following Max through the snow was like walking through a nightmare. The trees looked different, taller, whiter, and I swear some of them moved when we weren't looking. The cold was worse than anything I'd ever felt, cutting right through our winter clothes. Max led us to a cave made entirely of ice. Inside, we found Kyle's jacket frozen solid, covered in those same tribal markings that were on his arm. And then we saw them, the Wendigos, as the old shopkeeper had called them. They were beautiful in a terrifying way. Tall white creatures with skin like clear ice. You could almost see through them. They moved like dancers in the snow, and in the middle of them all was the Ice Mother, holding Kyle in her arms. He was half frozen, his skin turning transparent like theirs. "He's becoming one of us," the Ice Mother spoke, her voice sounding like cracking ice. "Just like your dog did. Just like your daughter will." I raised my flare gun, but Annie stepped forward. "Wait," she said. "I can feel what they feel. They're not evil, Dad. They're just lonely. All these years watching families camp here, wanting children of their own." The Ice Mother smiled, reaching out her hand. "One child can stay, become part of our family. The other can go free. Choose Jack Winters." That's when I realized all the other Wendigos around us were once children who had camped here, children who had been taken, transformed by the cold and loneliness. I looked at Kyle, nearly transformed, and Annie, who was starting to shimmer with frost herself. I had already lost Sarah. I couldn't lose my children too. I remembered the herbs the old shopkeeper had given me, the ones I'd stuffed in my pocket without thinking. With shaking hands, I pulled them out. The Ice Mother's eyes widened when she saw them. "You can't have my children," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Neither of them." I threw the herbs into my flare gun and fired it at the cave's ceiling. The red light mixed with the herbs filled the cave with a warm, bright glow. The Wendigos screamed. A sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Max jumped in front of us, his white fur glowing brighter than ever. He barked, but it wasn't a normal bark. It was like thunder in the snow. The Ice Mother loosened her grip on Kyle, who fell to the ground. "Annie," I shouted, "help your brother." Annie closed her eyes and raised her hands. Somehow she used the cold power she'd gotten from them against them. Ice crystals formed around the Wendigos, holding them back. But the Ice Mother was too strong. She reached for Annie with her long, frozen fingers. "You belong with us," she whispered. "You can feel it in your heart." That's when I knew what I had to do. Sarah would have done the same. "Take me instead," I said. "I'm offering myself in place of my children." The Ice Mother stopped. All the Wendigos turned to look at me. "A parent's love," the Ice Mother said softly. "It's been so long since we've felt that." I stepped forward, feeling the cold creep into my bones. "Let them go, and I'll stay. I'll be part of your family." Annie screamed. No, Dad, but I had made up my mind. The Ice Mother touched my chest, and I felt the cold spread through me. But as I started to freeze, something strange happened. The love I had for my children, it was stronger than her ice. Max howled one last time, and suddenly, the cave filled with a bright, warm light. When it faded, all the Wendigos were gone, including the Ice Mother. Kyle was back to normal, and Annie's frost powers were fading. But part of me had changed. I wasn't fully human anymore, but I wasn't a Wendigo either. I had become something in between. A guardian of the boundary between warmth and cold. It's been years since that night at Frost Hollow. My kids are grown up now, but none of us will ever forget what happened. Kyle recovered completely, but he can still see things others can't. Sometimes, when he takes pictures in cold places, strange white figures show up in them. He's become a famous photographer, taking pictures of places where the normal world meets the supernatural. Annie kept a tiny bit of her ice powers. On cold nights, frost patterns appear on her windows, making beautiful designs. She says it's her way of remembering that not all scary things are evil. Sometimes they're just lost and lonely. Max stayed with us, our faithful guardian with his snow-white fur that never changed back. He lived much longer than normal dogs do. Even now, people in the Boundary Waters sometimes spot a large white dog protecting lost hikers in snowstorms. As for me, well, I didn't fully turn into a Wendigo, but I didn't stay completely human either. Every winter I return to Frost Hollow. I watch over the campground, making sure no other families go through what we did. Sometimes, in the deepest part of winter, I can feel the Ice Mother and her children nearby, but they never try to take anyone anymore. The old Winnebago, we kept it. It sits in Kyle's backyard now, its brown and orange stripes faded by time. On cold nights, frost still forms on its windows from the inside, but it's not scary anymore. It's more like a reminder of how love can be stronger than any supernatural force. I still don't know if sharing this story was the right thing to do. But if you're ever camping in northern Minnesota in winter, and you see strange tracks in the snow, or hear children singing in the night, just remember this: head for home, keep your family close, and if you see a white dog in the storm, follow him. He'll lead you to safety. Because some family bonds are stronger than ice, and some stories never really end, they just turn into new beginnings. Last week, my grandkids came to visit me. Little Sarah, named after her grandmother, asked me why I always feel cold to touch. Tommy, who's just like Kyle was at that age, wanted to know why my eyes sometimes shine blue in his photos. I sat them down in front of the fireplace and showed them something I've kept all these years. Kyle's old camera with those first pictures from Frost Hollow. The images are faded now, but you can still see those tall white figures in the background. Grandpa, Sarah asked, do you ever see the Ice Mother anymore? I smiled and looked out the window at the falling snow. Sometimes, I told her, on the coldest nights I hear her singing. But she's not sad anymore. She found what she was really looking for, not children to take, but a reminder of what a parent's love can do. Just then we heard a familiar howl outside. The kids ran to the window and gasped. There in the yard stood a large white dog exactly like Max, watching over a group of deer taking shelter from the storm. Is that? Tommy started to ask. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's one of his children. Some things in this world we're not meant to fully understand. I felt the cold stirring inside me, like it always does when snow falls. But it's not a scary feeling anymore. It's a reminder that sometimes the strangest, scariest moments in our lives can turn into the most important ones. The kids begged me to tell them more stories about Frost Hollow, but I just smiled and shook my head. That's enough for tonight, I said. Some stories are better saved for when you're older. As they went to bed, I watched the snow falling outside. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall white figure among the trees, waving gently. I waved back. After all these years, we've come to an understanding, the Ice Mother and I. We both know now that the strongest magic isn't in taking, it's in protecting what you love. And that's the real end of my story. Or maybe, like all good stories, it's just the beginning of another one. My name is Frank O'Malley, and this happened to me back in the summer of 1968. I still get chills thinking about those 6 days in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Sometimes, late at night, I look at my metal arm and wonder if I made the right choice taking my family there. I was a mining engineer then, 45 years old, with a good job and a happy family. My wife Rebecca taught geology at the local college, and our son Tommy was just 13. Beck's a bright kid who loved collecting rocks just like his mom. We lived a normal life until that letter arrived. It was from an old mining company asking me to check out some abandoned copper mines they wanted to reopen. The pay was good, and Rebecca got excited about studying the old mine formations. Tommy? Well, he just couldn't wait to add some copper specimens to his rock collection. We decided to make it a family trip in our 1965 Dodge Travco RV. It was a beautiful thing. Silver blue, pretty rare model. I remember how proud I was when I first bought it. Funny how life works, that same RV would later try to eat us alive. I should have known something was wrong when we couldn't find the mine on any recent maps. The only directions we had came from a yellowed piece of paper from the 1930s. Even our compass started acting weird as we got closer to the mining region. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how it all started. That first morning when we packed up the RV and headed north, not knowing we were driving straight into a nightmare. The morning we left was bright and sunny. Tommy sat in the back of the RV, sorting his rock collection while Rebecca checked our maps one last time. Everything seemed so normal then. I wish I could go back and warn myself about what was coming. The first few hours on the road were fine. We sang songs, played travel games, and Tommy kept asking, "Are we there yet?" like any kid would. But as we drove deeper into Michigan's Upper Peninsula, things started feeling different. The roads got worse, all dirt and gravel with trees closing in on both sides. Our radio started picking up weird sounds, like old mining machinery and voices that weren't quite clear. I turned it off, telling myself it was just bad reception. Around 4 p.m. we needed gas. The only station we found was a rundown place with a single rusty pump. The old man working there gave us a strange look when Rebecca mentioned the mines. "You folks heading to Devil's Mining Road?" he asked, his voice shaking a little. When I nodded, he just shook his head and refused to give us directions. "Some places should stay forgotten," he said, then walked inside and locked the door. Rebecca tried to laugh it off, but I saw how she held Tommy a little closer after that. We bought some snacks from a vending machine and got back on the road. As the sun started setting, the sky turned an odd copper color. That's when our RV started making strange noises, not normal engine sounds, but more like metal scraping against metal. Tommy said he could hear whispers coming from the walls, but we told him it was just the wind. We should have listened to him. Looking for a place to camp, we turned onto an unmarked road. Old mining equipment lay scattered in the woods, rusty carts, broken drills, and tools half buried in the ground. The trees seemed to watch us as we drove past. "Dad," Tommy called from the back, "I think someone's following us." I checked all the mirrors but saw nothing except darkness and trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. We finally found a clearing to park the RV for the night. The spot looked perfect at first, flat ground, close to what seemed like an old mine entrance. But something felt off. The air was too still, and it had a weird metallic taste. While Rebecca made dinner, Tommy went outside to collect rocks. I was checking the RV's engine when I heard him yell excitedly, "Dad? Mom? Look what I found." He came running back with his hands full of strange red crystals. They seemed to glow slightly in the dying sunlight. Rebecca, being a geology professor, had never seen anything like them. "Put those down, Tommy," she said, trying to sound casual. "We don't know what they are." But it was too late, he'd already stuffed some in his pockets. That night, things got weird. Really weird. First we heard sounds coming from the old mine, clanking metal, pickaxes hitting rock, and what seemed like people talking. I grabbed my flashlight to check it out, thinking maybe some locals were working late. But when I shined the light into the mine entrance, it was completely empty. Around midnight, Tommy started running a fever. He was talking in his sleep about the miners and how they needed his help. Rebecca tried to cool him down with a wet cloth, but his skin felt hot, almost like touching a piece of metal left in the sun. Then came the knocking. It started soft, like someone tapping on the RV's walls. But it moved from the front, to the sides, to the back, getting louder each time. When I looked outside, I saw all our tools had been arranged in a perfect circle around the RV, but I hadn't moved them. "Frank," Rebecca whispered, holding Tommy close, "I think we should leave." I turned the key in the ignition, but the RV wouldn't start. Instead, the metal walls creaked like they were breathing. The radio turned on by itself, playing static and what sounded like old mining songs. That's when we heard footsteps approaching through the darkness. Heavy boots on gravel, getting closer and closer. A knock on the RV door made us all jump. "Folks," called a gravelly voice. "Name's Doc Wilson, and you folks are in serious trouble." I looked at Rebecca. She nodded, holding Tommy tighter. I opened the door. Doc Wilson stood there, an old man with white hair and tired eyes. He was wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 1930s, and he carried an old mining lamp. "You need to get your boy out of here," he said, looking at Tommy. "Those red crystals he found, they're calling to them. To the hungry ones." Rebecca spoke up, still holding Tommy, who was burning with fever. "What do you mean? Who are the hungry ones?" Doc Wilson came inside the RV, his hands shaking as he closed the door. "I was here in '38 when it happened. The mine disaster they covered up. We dug too deep, found something that should have stayed buried. Something that turns men into something else." Just then Tommy sat up, his eyes half opened. "They're singing to me, Dad. The miners in the walls. They want me to join them." A loud bang from outside made us all jump. Through the RV windows we saw shadows moving in the darkness. Tall, twisted shapes that seemed part human, part machine. "Your RV," Doc Wilson whispered. "It's sinking." He was right. The ground beneath us had turned soft, like quicksand made of metal shavings. The RV was slowly being pulled down. I tried the engine again. This time it started, but the sound was wrong, like the engine was screaming. The dashboard lights flickered, showing strange symbols instead of normal readings. "There's only one way to save your boy now," Doc Wilson said, "but you won't like it. First, you need to know what really happened in 1938. Tommy suddenly grabbed my arm, his hand burning hot. "Dad," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own, "the Copper King is coming." The ground shook. Outside, red lights began glowing deep in the mine entrance. The metal tools scattered around our RV started moving on their own, dragging themselves toward the mine like they were being pulled by giant magnets. Rebecca found her voice first. "What's a Copper King?" Doc Wilson's face went pale. "The thing that used to be human. The thing that rules the mines now. And it wants your boy." Doc Wilson's hands trembled as he pulled out an old leather journal. In the RV's dim light, he began to tell us what happened back in 1938. "We were just regular miners then," he said, his voice shaking. "Found a deep tunnel filled with those red crystals. The boss wanted more and more copper. We kept digging, even when we started hearing the voices." Tommy moaned in his sleep, and Rebecca noticed something terrifying. Tiny copper-colored lines were spreading across his arms, like metal veins under his skin. "First it was the children who disappeared," Doc Wilson continued. "Sons and daughters of miners. Then we found them, changed. Their bodies turning to metal, their eyes glowing red like the crystals. A scratching sound came from the RV's roof. Something was up there, moving. The Copper King was once our mine supervisor," Doc explained. "He made a deal with whatever lives in those deep tunnels, traded the children's humanity for more copper. Now he's neither human nor machine. He's something worse." Suddenly Tommy sat straight up. "They're here," he whispered. His eyes had a faint copper glow. The RV's metal walls began to vibrate. Through the windows we saw them Tupelcid figures, half human and half machine, moving toward us. Their bodies were a horrible mix of flesh and copper. Tools and mining equipment fused to their limbs. "We need to move now," I shouted, but the RV was stuck fast in the metallic ground. That's when we heard it, a deep grinding sound like huge gears turning underground. The mine entrance lit up with an eerie red glow. "He's coming," Doc Wilson whispered. "The Copper King." Rebecca grabbed my arm. "Frank, look at Tommy." Our son was standing now, walking like a sleepwalker toward the RV door. The copper lines on his skin were spreading faster. "There's only one way to save him," Doc Wilson said urgently. "But we have to get to the old ritual chamber deep in the mine. It's where this all started, and it's the only place it can end." Before we could stop him, Tommy unlocked the door and stepped outside into the darkness. I ran after Tommy with Rebecca and Doc Wilson right behind me. The cold night air hit us as we chased our son toward the mine entrance. Our flashlights showed more twisted metal human figures in the darkness, but they didn't attack, they were just watching. Waiting. "Tommy, stop." Rebecca screamed, but he kept walking like he was in a trance. Just before the mine entrance, Tommy finally stopped. But when he turned around, my heart nearly stopped. His eyes were glowing copper, and his skin had a metallic sheen. "They need me, Dad," he said in a voice that echoed strangely. "The Copper King says I'm special." That's when we heard it. A sound like massive gears grinding together, getting closer. The ground shook under our feet. From deep in the mine came heavy footsteps that made the walls tremble. "He's coming," Doc Wilson whispered. "Everyone, hide." We pulled Tommy behind some old mining equipment just as the Copper King emerged. I'll never forget what I saw. It was huge, twice the size of a normal man. Its body was a horrible mixture of human flesh and mining machinery. Where its face should have been, there was a mass of copper pipes and glowing red crystals. "I can smell the boy," it said in a voice like metal scraping on metal. "He belongs to the mine now." Tommy tried to stand up, drawn to the monster's voice, but Rebecca held him tight. I could feel the metal in my watch and belt buckle pulling toward the creature. It was controlling anything made of metal. "The ritual chamber," Doc Wilson whispered to me. "It's down the main shaft, past the old elevator. If we can get there, we might save Tommy. But we need a distraction." I looked at my family. My wife holding our transforming son, both of them scared but brave. I knew what I had to do. "When I say run," I whispered to Rebecca, "take Tommy and follow Doc. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." I picked up an old piece of pipe, knowing it was probably useless against the Copper King, but I had to try something. "Hey," I shouted, stepping out from our hiding place. "You want to fight? Come get one." The Copper King turned its horrible face toward me, and I saw my own reflection in its crystal eyes. The Copper King moved towards me, its metal parts creaking. "Run," I yelled, and saw Rebecca and Doc Wilson pulling Tommy into the mine's main tunnel. I swung the pipe at the monster, but it just laughed. A sound like crushing gears. With one motion, it ripped the pipe from my hands using some kind of magnetic power. Then it did something worse. It started pulling at the fillings in my teeth. "Foolish human," it growled. "You cannot fight the mine." I ran into the tunnel, my heart pounding. Behind me, I could hear the Copper King's heavy steps and the screeching of metal as it followed. The walls seemed to be moving. Pipes and old rails twisting like snakes. Up ahead, I caught glimpses of Rebecca's flashlight. Tommy was fighting them now, trying to go back to the Copper King. His skin had turned almost completely metallic. "The elevator shaft," Doc Wilson shouted. "We're almost there." We reached an old mining elevator, its cables hanging loose. Below was nothing but darkness. It's fawdy for parch, besor, it's fawdy into a train. The platform was gone, leaving just a deep hole going down into the earth. "There's a maintenance ladder," Doc Wilson said, pointing to rusty metal rungs in the wall. "It leads to the ritual chamber." Rebecca looked down, terrified. Tommy can't climb in this state. Then I'll carry him," I said, reaching for our son, but when I touched him, his skin burned my hands. The copper had spread everywhere now. The tunnel behind us filled with red light. The Copper King was getting closer. "No time." Doc Wilson suddenly pushed past us. "I'll hold it off. Been waiting 30 years to face this monster again. Get down there and save your boy." Before we could stop him, Doc Wilson pulled out some old dynamite from his jacket and headed back toward the approaching horror. "The ritual," we shouted back. "Rebecca knows what to do. Use the red crystals against him." I grabbed Tommy, ignoring the burning pain, and started down the ladder. Rebecca followed, clutching her geology bag with some crystals she'd collected. Above us, we heard Doc Wilson's voice. "Remember me, you metal devil." Then came an explosion that shook the entire mine. We climbed down in almost total darkness, the only light coming from Tommy's glowing copper skin. The ladder seemed endless. Every few seconds, pieces of metal and rock fell past us from the explosion above. "Dad," Tommy said in a weak voice. "I can feel them all around us, in the walls. They were all children once, like me." Finally, our feet touched solid ground. Rebecca's flashlight showed us a huge underground chamber. The walls were covered in strange carvings and veins of those red crystals. In the center was a circle made of copper and strange symbols. "This is it," Rebecca said, pulling out her geology books and the crystals she'd collected. "The old miners must have used this place for some kind of ritual." But before we could do anything, we heard it, the grinding sound of the Copper King, somehow still alive, coming down the shaft after us. Tommy started walking toward the sound like a puppet being pulled by strings. "No." I grabbed him, my hands burning from touching his metallic skin. "Rebecca, do something." She started placing the red crystals around the circle, her hands shaking as she checked her notes. "The crystals can be used to reverse the transformation, but, Frank, it needs a sacrifice. Someone has to take Tommy's place." The chamber filled with red light as the Copper King landed heavily behind us. It wasn't alone. All around us, metal human figures emerged from the walls. Former children, their bodies twisted with copper and machinery. "The boy belongs to the mine," the Copper King growled. "Just like all the others." I looked at my son, now almost completely transformed, then at my wife. I knew what I had to do. "Rebecca," I said, "start the ritual. I'll be the sacrifice." "Dad, no," Tommy cried, fighting against the transformation for the first time. The Copper King laughed and started walking toward us. Each step it took made the metal in the chamber vibrate. "You can't stop what's already begun," it said. But Rebecca had already started chanting something from her notes, placing the final crystal in the circle. The chamber began to glow. The red crystals in the circle started glowing brighter and brighter. I pushed Tommy behind Rebecca and stepped into the circle. The moment I did, I felt a burning pain shoot through my entire body. The sacrifice must be willing. Rebecca read from her notes, her voice shaking. The father's love for his son. The Copper King roared, "No," and tried to reach for Tommy, but the crystal circle created some kind of barrier it couldn't cross. Tommy screamed as the copper started leaving his body like water flowing backward. But as it left him, it started flowing into me. The pain was worse than anything I'd ever felt, like my blood was turning to molten metal. "Frank," Rebecca cried, holding Tommy, who was slowly becoming human again. The Copper King started hammering at the barrier, making the whole chamber shake. "You cannot take what belongs to the mine. Watch me." I growled through the pain. My right arm was now completely metal, fused with pieces of mining equipment. But Tommy's skin was returning to normal. Suddenly Doc Wilson's voice echoed through the chamber. The mine must be sealed. He was alive, standing at the entrance, holding his last stick of dynamite. Before anyone could stop him, he lit it and threw it at the chamber's ceiling. "Rebecca, take Tommy and run," I shouted. "The maintenance tunnel. Behind you." As Rebecca pulled Tommy toward the exit, the dynamite exploded. Huge rocks started falling from the ceiling. The Copper King screamed in rage as the chamber began collapsing. I tried to follow my family, but my metal arm had fused to the ground inside the circle. The transformation had only partially taken hold, leaving me half human, half machine. The last thing I saw before the rocks buried everything was Tommy looking back at me, his eyes normal again, reaching out and screaming, "Dad." Then darkness. I don't know how long I was buried in the darkness. Hours? Days? The metal parts of me kept me alive somehow. I could feel the Copper King and his followers, trapped deeper in the mine, screaming in rage. Eventually I heard digging. Rescue workers broke through and found me. Rebecca had called for help as soon as she and Tommy got out. When they pulled me from the rubble, I was changed forever. My right arm and part of my chest were pure metal, a constant reminder of what happened in that mine. The official story was that it was just a mine collapse. Nobody would believe the truth anyway. They sealed off the whole area with concrete and warning signs. Our old RV is still there, slowly sinking into the metal-filled ground. Tommy recovered completely, but sometimes I catch him staring at his hands like he's making sure they're still flesh and blood. Rebecca published a research paper about the strange red crystals, but left out the scary parts. She keeps the last crystal locked away in a lead box. As for me, well, I learned to live with my metal arm. Most people think it's some kind of prosthetic. Sometimes it aches when I'm near old mines, like it's being called back. And every now and then, late at night, I can hear faint whispers coming from it, the voices of the mine trying to reach out. Doc Wilson's body was never found. Some say he finally got his revenge on the Copper King. Others think he's still down there, fighting monsters in the deep tunnels. But here's the scariest part. Last week, Tommy showed me a letter he got. It was written in copper ink, with just 4 words, "We're still here waiting." I keep thinking about all those other mines out there, and what might be hiding in them. Some holes in the earth should stay buried. Some treasures aren't worth the price. So if you're ever driving through Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and see an unmarked dirt road leading to old copper mines, keep driving. And whatever you do, don't pick up any red crystals that glow in the dark, because sometimes the mine remembers, and it's still hungry.